Hello, all you theater lovers, both out and proud and on the DL, and welcome back to Broadway Breakdown and our latest episode of Backstage Pass, giving you an insider's look at the goings-on of our fabulous, complex industry. Today, we are continuing with Marcel on the Train, a classic stage company. Written by Ethan Slater and Marshall Paylett, the play tells the true story of Marcel Marceau before he became the world's most famous mime when he was a young man in Nazi-occupied France, helping guide Jewish children to safety during World War II. In this episode, I am joined by Classic Stage Company's producing artistic director, Jill Rafson. Jill took the role of CSC's artistic director in 2022 after having worked with Roundabout Theater Company as associate artistic director, as well as the artistic director of Roundabout Underground, a program which helped foster works by newly emerging playwrights. Jill Rafson has helped develop such plays as Bad Jews, the Pulitzer Prize-winning English, and the Tony-winning The Humans. She's also worked as a dramaturg on numerous projects and has worked with establishments like City Center and the Broadway League. So, yeah, she knows of what she speaks. So let's grab our pass and head backstage to my conversation with Jill now.
Really, I beg to differ with you.
How do you mean?
You're the top.
Yeah?
You're an arrow color. You're the top. You're a Coolidge dollar. You're the nimble tread of the feet of Fred Astaire.
Jill Rafson, welcome to Broadway Breakdown.
Thanks for having me.
So you are the producing artistic director at Classic Stage Company. You've had that title since 2022. For the uncultureds out there, the unknowings out there, what necessarily does that mean? What does that title mean? And then how does that work on like a day-to-day basis? Like what's a natural day for Jill Rafson? And then sort of like the overall year for a producing artistic director.
Sure. It's, you kind of have to be a Jack or a Jill in this case of all trades in order to be an artistic director.
A Jack or a Jill Rafson, you mean?
There you go. Exactly. And I think that it's a job that looks different every single day. And so I have found that the thing that people understand that I do is I get to pick the shows, right? That's the super fun part of the job, figuring out what is the right programming for a mission-driven nonprofit organization where we have an identity as an institution. We have a mission that we follow and that we owe to our audience to follow. And so making sure that Classic Stage always feels like Classic Stage in whatever form I want that to be, because I get to shape the vision for it, which is a really exciting thing to be able to say, well, what is a classic and how do I want to reinterpret it over my time in this organization? That's a lot of the fun part. On the day to day, it's everything from being a line producer to chatting with an artist about a future project, chatting with an artist about a present project, being in the room during previews. There's fundraising to do, there's marketing decisions to make, there's hiring of staff, there's hiring of artists, there's working with our education program to make sure that that's all running and expanding if we want that. So it's a lot of different pieces. So it's this curatorial role where, I could spend a day only looking at the budget. And that is also a version of curation. And it's such a funny thing because I love that different artistic directors got into this from so many different angles. I came up from the literary path. I really came up doing new play development, and here I am at a classical theater, which I think is fun, and it explains sort of how we wound up at Marcel on the Train, which I know we'll talk about. But I love that some folks have done that path. A lot of artistic directors are directors. Some folks are purely from a producing standpoint. I kind of like that it's a job that can suit a lot of different skill sets, and that it's a job that has forced me to really understand how every single department that makes an institutional theater function runs day to day to come together for the cohesive whole that we're putting out in front of our audience. So there is no typical day. I can spend this Monday we have a reading going up at night, so I'll be at the theater all day sitting in on that rehearsal. And while I'm sitting there, I'll be listening to the play, but I'll also be editing a grant proposal. And that's just sort of the norm. And for me, that's part of what keeps it interesting.
Amazing. Yeah. Variety is the spice of life. With a place like Classic Stage Company, as you said, like every nonprofit has their own mission statement. So for Classic Stage Company, what is the mission statement currently? Because I feel like over time with different artistic directors, mission statements start to shift a bit as times grow and change.
Yeah, the short version of our mission statement, I won't give you the word for word, is we're here to reimagine the classics for today's audiences. And
Mhm.
so I think that this organization which has been around for, 50 something years, started out from a place of like the classics meant something really, really specific. They
Mm.
did a lot of the Greeks, did a lot of Shakespeare, over time got more into the European sort of your naturalists, your Chekhov, your Ibsen, your Strindberg. And I think it was probably about a dozen or so years ago that CSC moved into doing musicals as well and acknowledging that as part of the canon. It took a really long time for this theater to do an American classic,
Mhm.
and to finally do the first Tennessee Williams for the organization. And so what we mean by a classic has evolved over time, I think, out of necessity. And one of the things that got me excited about joining this organization was the idea of getting to teach people that the classics are not a closed set, that what we thought of as a classic back when this organization was founded in the 60s is certainly not the same as what we see it as today because time has marched on and the
Mm.
classics don't end at a certain date. Right? We're still allowed to be making new classics. And I sort of love thinking of that as an activity, that
Mhm.
the canon is not just done for all time. And so, one of the things I talk about a lot is some of the plays that shaped me the most were like plays written in the 90s. And much as it hurts my heart to admit how long ago that was, if we don't start doing revivals of those plays, then they're not going to get canonized. And so what does it look like to continually question what the canon is and which plays belong in it? And I kind of love that CSC has this powerful spotlight of being an off-Broadway institution where by putting something in our stage, we get to say, "Hey, it's at Classic Stage Company. It's a classic." And the forward thinking of that is really one of the privileges of getting to run this place. To say, I love the work of Alice Childress. It was ignored in its own time to a large extent by the mainstream theater community because of the identity of that writer and some of the themes she was writing about Black women in America, and she was pushing boundaries. And by doing her work in a play like Wine in the Wilderness last year around this time, we really got to shine this light on her. And my biggest hope is that by putting work like that at Classic Stage, other people feel like they can do it too. And
Mm.
so if we can have this ripple effect that the plays that we choose to do and say, I believe this is a classic. Hey, audience, do you agree? I hope it also means a lot of other artistic directors will agree and find it easier to put plays like that on their stages.
Absolutely. So then for something like Marcel on the Train, which is a new work, how does that come across your desk? And then where does that fit into the mission statement currently, or as Classic Stage keeps evolving the mission statement?
We do have this history of doing new works, but the new works always have some tie to the classics in their own way. So, Venus and Fur is one of the biggest hits that CSC ever had, and that was obviously a new play by David Ives, but it was based on a quite old text.
Mhm.
And so I love that that's a way that CSC can be a part of the new works conversation while still trafficking in what makes us us. And so Marcel felt like such a perfect fit in that way that not only is it just a period piece, but it's about a classic figure. And my sort of theme for this season was i- instead of going broader with what we think of as a classic, it was going deeper. So, we did The Baker's Wife, which is a deep cut for a Stephen Schwartz fan,
Mhm.
and that hadn't had a major New York production. So Stephen, as a writer who I think will be part of the canon, I love that we got to show something that people didn't already know very well. And then for our final show that'll follow Marcel, we're doing a Lost Thornton Wilder play that has never been seen in New York. Obviously a master American playwright, and we're getting to do what is essentially a new play. It's only been done one time in a regional production, and so that's really exciting. So for Marcel, it was saying, here's this figure who you know a lot about, who is sort of part of our cultural history. And here's a story that we can go deeper with because we're not going to tell you the part about him that you already know. You know the guy's a mime. We all
Mhm.
know that he ends up there.
Mhm.
And he had this whole other life before that version of his persona started. And I loved the opportunity to just really dig in and say, okay, we can do a new play about this figure. And it just sort of hits at the sort of perfect Venn diagram of what I like to do for the organization, to take my affection for new play development and what we're trying to do with the classics and hit that overlap sort of perfectly.
So how did Marcel come across your desk?
Yeah, it's funny. I had a producer friend who said, there's a producer I really, really want you to know who has the Prince Fellowship and who I think is really smart and has an idea that I think might be a really interesting fit for you. So I agreed to sit down with Max Beer, and he introduced me to Mitch Morois, and they started talking about their passion for Marcel on the train. And the interesting thing was that I was already in conversation with Ethan Slater because he obviously had appeared at CSC in Assassins, which was before my time with the company. But I had already started getting to know him as a writer. We did a concert of a piece that he wrote with Nick Blameyer called Edge of the World and had a great time doing that. And so I already really believed in his work as a multi-hyphenate artist. And so when Max and Mitch pitched me this particular play, I was like, oh, this might be a really cool fit for us. And I have a bit of an affinity for artists spreading their wings. Last season we had LaShawne's direct for the first time. And obviously she's very well known as a performer, and she's also been producing. And I love getting the chance to use the playground of this theater to let great artists try new things. And one of the things about me leading this theater but not being a director myself is I'm not taking up slots. I'm just choosing projects and artists who I think are great and giving them that space to play. And so to be able to do that with someone like Ethan, who already had this deep affection for CSC from his experience here and really felt like our physical space would be a fantastic fit for this particular work, it just all sort of made sense. And once I got to know Marshall Palet as well, I mean, they wrote a wonderful piece together, but Marshall's also a fantastic director who anyone who sees this show will know he understands how to use the space that is CSC so beautifully. It's tricky. It's a thrust space, and some people get really hamstrung by it. But it is, he has done something so theatrical that takes advantage of everything that we offer. And so it just ended up being this great confluence.
Absolutely. So you, I mean, you had a life before this, but you were a literary manager at Roundabout before you went on to be the associate artistic director at Roundabout. Um, First of all, associate artistic director. Can you walk me through a little bit about what that is? And then we're going to go backwards towards literary manager and tie that to your time at Classic Stage as someone who has had a history and legacy of developing new works and working with new playwrights and sort of all of that. But first, associate artistic producer.
Yeah, I mean, the funny thing is, I think it's probably different at every theater in a few ways, and I think it's different depending on your artistic director. So, I was really lucky. I feel like I grew up at Roundabout. I found a home there really early in my career, and the late great Todd Hames just kept saying yes. And so when I got there, I mean, I was an intern, and part of my job, we were just starting to do new plays regularly, and so I literally was sending out letters, not emails, letters to agents saying, "Hi, Roundabout does new plays now. Would you like to submit any?" Which, by the time I left, it was like, please stop sending us all the plays. We have enough plays. So it's been quite a trajectory. Todd was a businessman by training, a businessman who loved theater and was incredibly good at relationship building and long-term visioning. And so I think that I served him really well as somebody who could sort of take ownership of some of the artistic programs and just keep all of those trains running at the same time. So I would say that Roundabout is a place that during my time there grew to have 5 operating theaters. I largely was working on the off-Broadway space for most of that time. The Roundabout Underground program was a baby of mine, where we only did plays that were giving professional New York debuts to emerging playwrights, and really trying to be a launch pad for those writers. And then also programming the Laura Pels Theater with new works primarily. Sometimes we snuck in a revival. but really keeping an eye on that new work, younger artist pipeline was a big part of my role there. And over time, also developing a lot of sort of service programs towards artists. So we developed we started listening to what the artists were saying they needed and seeing if it was something we could afford to say yes to. So we started a program called Space Jam, where it just meant that you could have free residency time, where we just gathered a bunch of writers in a room and they could get work done and form community. And we would do that a few times a year, and we rented out an office for them at a WeWork, and they could just go have like a private writing space for a bit, which was fantastic. We started a directing fellowship program, and then we met too many good directors. So then we had to start a whole directors group to accommodate all the great people we met. I mean, that all fell under my purview as an associate artistic director, to make sure that we were sort of doing these great mission-driven programs. I would say to Todd all the time, "You're letting me do all the fun stuff because I get to spend the money. You have to spend all this time raising it and managing it, and then you let me go off and create these programs for the organization, and it's awesome." But that was the nature of our relationship, and I think that there were other associate ADs who were more involved in the day-to-day financial management, but that just wasn't the nature of our setup. And so knowing that I was interested in running my own ship at some point, I spent the pandemic doing some graduate courses in financial management for nonprofits so that I could, put my Todd hat on eventually, which has come in very, very handy. But yeah, the associate AD job I think it really is different for every organization and partnership. And I loved the version that I got to experience.
In a lot of ways, you've been primed for this moment. Um,
Yeah.
so also, how long were you with Roundabout until? Was it until 2022?
Yeah, I was there I mean, gosh, I interned in 2004. I went away and worked at the Broadway League for a year after that. And then Todd called me and said, "I have a job for you. Come back." And so I was there from 2005 until early 2022. And then I transitioned over to CSC that spring. Yeah.
So then I have you to both thank and blame for significant other, is what you're telling me.
That is exactly right. I mean, you can blame me for Josh Harmon entirely. We had a great time doing a lot of Josh plays at that theater. I don't know. That play also spoke to me at the moment that we were doing it in a very strong way, and
Yeah.
I don't know. I love that piece so much.
Brilliant piece. And yeah, I know it should speak to everybody based on wherever you are in your life. And as you continue to change in your life, it'll speak to you in a different way. So with Marcel, when you're looking at a new script, what is it that helps you kind of lean towards whether you're interested in it or not? Are there factors, or is it a gut feeling?
I wish I could ever pin this down, but I think that um, trusting your taste is just a huge part of the gig. One of the things that was really important to me in my early years was just reading at volume so that I was making informed decisions, because I think if you don't know a lot of plays, and especially if you don't actually know the classics that are all truly like the basic vocabulary that all of today's writers are building off of, sometimes knowingly and sometimes not, because it's just been absorbed into them culturally. You sort of have to know the context in which you are reading, and I also think that as somebody who has always worked within institutions, it's not just, do I like this play or do I think this will sell a lot of tickets? Is this right for the theater that I am representing? And so I love that I get to read with mission in mind, because there are some new plays that I absolutely love and would be delightful to see in a thrust space that make truly no sense to do at a place like CSC, because it's just not our mission. And I think that mission drift is a real danger for organizations, especially these days when the sort of vagaries of the finances, especially post-COVID, mean you have to be more reliant on things like star names or enhancement partners. And there's nothing wrong with that. I've certainly said yes to both. But I think they can get tricky if it forces you to say yes to work that doesn't make sense for your organization. And the thing that I'm always keeping an eye out for is I want people to know it's a CSC show when they walk in the door. It should feel like it's meant to be with us. And if they think it should be on some other stage, then I'm doing it wrong. This isn't just about me producing plays that I like. This has to be plays that are right for CSC. So I certainly know that in my own taste. I have a soft spot for certain genres. I mean, we're doing a reading series on mysteries and thrillers this year because I think they're great, and I don't know why New York theaters don't do them as much as the regionals do.
Mhm.
So I thought I'd see what New York audiences how New York audiences responded to those by doing a few of them on our stage this season. And so far, it's been really positive. I also love a dystopian play, and I love plays that are really just deeply theatrical, plays that feel like they don't belong in any other medium. That's always exciting to me. And I know I'm a sucker for a solid narrative. So I also like to push myself sometimes to make sure I'm considering the things that are a little more absurdist, that are really playing with form more, because it doesn't come to me as naturally personally. And so I like to really force myself to take a closer look at that kind of work to make sure I'm giving it all consideration.
Mhm.
But I think that so much is gut and so much is artist relationships and trusting that you can look at a piece that is just not finished and know whether it can get to the place that it wants to be. And one of the basic tenets I always think of as a dramaturg is it's not about me saying I'm going to make this play better. It's about saying, how do we make this the best possible version of a play that this writer wants it to be?
Mm.
Because it's not about what I want it to be. If it's not about their vision, you're going to get away from those initial impulses and you're going to find a muddy mess at the end.
If people aren't watching this, that was me giving a silent clap to Jill. No, I talk about this all the time, and you'll hear that everyone will hear this in a later episode with our catch up with Mitch and Max. That's always been how I feel people should go about a project, or even when they're and we'll tie this now into Marcel again and opening night. But whenever I do reviews on this podcast, my first aim is what is it that the team is trying to make? Do
Yep.
I think you're successful at that? Third question is, did I like it? That's for me, that's the third one.
Yep.
Because I have read reviews from people that like are really well written pans, like just very bitchy, and I'm like, you have a way with words, ma'am or sir, but you absolutely did not know what the show was trying to be, and thus I have to disregard everything you just wrote. Do you read reviews, Jill?
I do. It's sort of a professional necessity, which
Mhm.
I honestly I encourage a lot of the artists we work with to read at their own peril, because whether it's great or terrible, it just gets in your brain
Mhm.
in a way. And so, but I have to
Yeah.
for marketing purposes, and that's fine. I think it's a useful thing to sort of know what's out there and to make sure you know what the actors are walking into, because if you've had a preview period that we've experienced this with lesser known titles or plays that just weren't star driven. And so we weren't like selling tickets like crazy during that preview period before people knew what the show was really about. Um, sometimes they've been used to one kind of audience, and you need to know, hey, the audience is going to look different on the other side. Now they've been told you're a hit.
Mhm.
And so as not to scare the artist, you need to sort of help prepare them. And of course it can go the other way as well, and making sure that they don't feel like the air has been sucked out of the room and that we're doing everything we can to make sure there's a great responsive audience in the space every night. And also to use the reviews to tell us who is our audience, right?
Mhm.
Like, are we promoting this to the right people and speaking about it in the right ways? What are the things people responded to that we may or may not have seen coming? And leaning into that in our strategies about who we're trying to get in front of and how we are framing the piece in front of them.
Absolutely. So this is a question I've been asking everyone then as well. So when reading reviews, how, if you were to get, let's say like a critical review, how would you parse out between this really doesn't apply to what I want to do, or that's actually a good point. Let me hold on to that for future reference.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it has to do with we've been reading a lot of these reviewers for a long time and trying to get a sense of were we expecting them to like this, because you do learn their taste in the same way that you learn your own.
Hmm.
And to me, it goes back to what you were saying earlier. It's, did they even want to get on the ride, or did they board a train, so to speak, that isn't the one we were driving?
Hmm.
If they have gotten on board and they have thoughtful responses, that I find so helpful.
Mm.
And I love when reviewers are actually constructive. I think that can be really great, where they see the thing you were trying to do and help you know if you succeeded in hitting the things you were trying to hit. The things I don't find as helpful are when they're like, yeah, no, this just wasn't for me. And then they pontificate on why. I can't make it be for them. And we all have different taste, and that's fine. Like, I know, you know, every now and then I'll love one, but I'm not a farce person. It's just not my brand of humor. And so I would never go out of my way to try to share my opinion on one because it's not going to be helpful to anyone. I'm
Mhm.
like, yeah, people getting hit in the face with a door, it doesn't do anything for me. So you don't need to hear me tell you whether it was a well executed face to door. Like,
Yeah.
so you have to take it all with a grain of salt. And I think it's valid. I think it's also we're in such an odd moment for theater criticism of what who are the voices that are out there. There are both more voices. I think we're finally getting a greater diversity of voices, not as wide as it should be, but we're at least on a path. Um, but we also are getting less critical response from what used to be the mainstream publications. They're just not giving as much space as they used to critical voices who would review at huge volume. And
Mm.
so, what does it mean to get criticism from someone who is a professional critic versus coming from more of a place of fandom? Both are valuable, but valuable in really different ways.
Mm.
So I've certainly seen that evolve over the course of my career, and it's making me change how I take in the feedback that we get following an opening.
So with something like Marcel then, to pivot from criticism to now going back a few months,
Yeah.
you have this relationship with Ethan, you've met Max and Mitch, you know Marshall. So you read the piece, uh, and you say that you want to do it. Sort of what does the next steps look like between Classic Stage Company and the creative team going forward from, yes, you want to do this, to announcing it, to actually it going up on stage?
Yeah, well, with a piece like this, where you're talking to enhancement partners working with a nonprofit, it immediately has a sort of two-pronged trajectory. So, on the one side, sitting down with the artists and talking about the piece itself, my immediate response to it, so that I can kind of give them fresh eyes, because we started our conversations before they did their workshop at Williamstown, and then I was able to watch an archival of that workshop, and like we were able to talk about, okay, what have we learned from that? What are the things you want to work on in the piece itself? And then at the same time, Mitch and Max and I were talking about numbers and figuring out, what is this partnership going to look like? What is the timing that's right for this piece? What is our deal going to look like? And so those things were happening at the same time. And once we were all ready to, reach an agreement on that, we kind of loop them into the larger CSC season announcement timeline and make sure that everybody feels good about getting that out into the world, which I guess was around, gosh, when did we announce last year? I'm going to say June of
Mm.
2025 that we announced the project. And by then, we also knew already that we had a limited rehearsal time just based on artist schedules. And so we wanted to make sure we went in to our official rehearsal period as primed as possible. And so we scheduled a workshop in the fall, and we knew that would be a big time for us to get to work on not only the text but also making sure that we were starting to home in on who our final cast was going to be. And we'd even gotten some of our designers on board and were able to play with some of the technical elements. The show involves like shadow puppetry. Great, let's play with the lights, which you don't always get to do in advance, and
Mm.
like be in the space of CSC itself ahead of the game so that we could see what's going to work, what's not going to work. So we weren't figuring that out in tech when you don't have as much time to play and to try. I mean, it's sort of an ideal trajectory, honestly, to give yourself that kind of time, and it doesn't always work.
Mhm.
But for a new play, a world premiere in particular, it's so valuable to get those opportunities, and I was really glad that was how we tracked this out.
Yeah. Would you say that that's a contingency that you have to think about for a new play as opposed to a classic work, of being able to have a little bit extra time to just sort of map it out in the space, so see it up on its feet, as opposed to, like, say, doing a Night of the Iguana, which at the very least works on its feet, if not necessarily the production you're about to do. Is that
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I mean, I think that the sort of developmental culture that I came out of at Roundabout, was very much about making sure that each piece is given the right amount of time so that you were setting it up for success,
Mhm.
particularly when it came to new work. And in some ways, over I was at Roundabout for 17 years growing this new works program. And I do think that in some ways during that time, we almost overcorrected on the preparation. I think that there were moments or years that the culture of readings and workshops became oppressive for writers. And I started to feel like writers were actually writing towards music stands.
Mhm.
And some of the best lines in the play would be in the stage directions because they knew it would be read out loud at a reading.
Mhm.
And I was like, that's not good. That's
Mm.
taking away from theatricality. And I think we've started to get out of that phase and into a place of just meeting each play where it is, because there is no template for how to develop a new play. And I feel like I've done 80 different versions of getting a play from the first draft that I fell in love with to production. And so Marcel ended up on the path that was right for Marcel and that I wouldn't necessarily prescribe to every play. Like, this is a really physical piece. It needed to be in physical space
Mhm.
in a way that not every play that we're going to talk about does. And you just have to be sort of prepared budgetarily and in terms of planning your timeline to commit the resources that make sense to a play. But it's one of the things I'm really proud of bringing to CSC, that we can have a culture of development here and not. I think again, this is in large part because I'm not a director. I'm sure that John Doyle had a vision for his productions, and he was really confident in what he was going to do. He didn't need a developmental phase.
Mm.
He was sure of his vision for that particular piece and could put it up on stage efficiently and to a really satisfying aesthetic place. Um, there are also some revivals that need more of that time, where it's a real reimagining. And I have a sort of like long-term bee in my bonnet about the way that we do or do not invest in directors, because the idea that a director can show up on the first day of rehearsal for a new staging of a classic play and to claim that they haven't done a huge amount of developmental work along the way is a bit silly, right? They're not just putting it on its feet. That's not what we do.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Someday I want to get some funding to do commissions for directors, because we've recognized that playwrights can only thrive when they are supported in their process. And I would love to see that translate to directors, because otherwise we're just going to be shortchanging ourselves, I think, from getting really interesting emerging talents to take a chance on spending their time developing an exciting new take on a classic play. And so I'm sure there are classics I will do that want more developmental opportunities.
Mhm.
And some we've already done in that way, and others are going to be pretty ready to go.
Mm.
But you have to be able to meet the piece where it is.
Absolutely. I also don't know why Night of the Iguana was the first one to pop in my head. Such a random play to be like, I don't know this one. Um,
It's a
so then
tricky one. Yeah.
it is it's a tricky Williams that like has worked but also has easily not worked. I don't know why that was the one I picked, but it's the one I picked. Uh, so for classic stage, I mean, I guess just doesn't necessarily have to be a spoiler, but like, do you have titles in your head going forward that you would love to do at some point down the line, not necessarily next season, but in the upcoming seasons?
Oh yeah, I have titles, I have just authors, I have directors. They're sort of on my dream list, so I don't want to give too much away. But I've said publicly before that Wendy Wasserstein remains on my wish list,
Mm.
and I relate to her as a Jewish woman, and I really, really want to make sure that her work doesn't get left behind because the writer is not around to advocate for herself.
Mhm.
So that's something that's on my mind. I think one of the things I've brought to CSC is my interest in American classics, and so I can definitely see us spending some time there. Um, CSC has a huge history with Shakespeare, and for me, we'll always go back to Shakespeare every now and then. But a lot of theaters do Shakespeare and a lot of them do it really, really well. And so I get excited about the Shakespeare that gets brought to me, that has a real vision and a real, this is why it can only be done at CSC. Those are really fantastic moments where you're like, oh yeah, for our space, for our audience, we are the ones to do this.
Mhm.
So that's always fun. And then musicals. In I'm really enjoying the niche we have found that is sort of the weird musicals, the forgotten musicals. I mean, I Can Get It For You Wholesale was a huge passion project for me. I loved doing The Baker's Wife, um, doing these pieces that we can, again, canonize in this active way that I was talking about. I love that. I love that, we I remember saying this to Julia Lester, I would love that all these girls in high school don't just dream about playing, Annie or, getting to be the baker's wife in Into the Woods, but that they
Mhm.
dream of getting to be Miss Marmalstein, right? Like, how
1000%.
do we make that piece part of the regular repertory?
Mhm.
That's really fun. And I think there are a lot of musicals that aren't getting done and that aren't really grand enough for the encores treatment, that we can really serve the community by bringing them back to life. That's an exciting project for me.
So you don't have to spoil titles, but if we're talking musicals, are there particular decades that you look at and you go, this is like a nice sweet spot that we can pull from?
I mean, honestly, I'm inconsistent about it because I think that there are a lot of musicals from the 60s and 70s
Mhm.
that I find really interesting and strange and that I want to spend more time exploring, and that in the case of so many musicals, it's like, wow, this score is great, and oh, the book. So
Mhm.
I'm in my spare time, that's the deep dive of figuring out what are the pieces I can look at. That's why we did this great benefit reading of The Rink this fall, because that is just a title that I was like, "Well, I know so many of these songs and nobody knows the plot." I mean, The Baker's Wife was really similar. People knew Meadowlark, but they didn't know the show. And so how do
Mhm.
we sort of rescue shows like that? I mean, obviously
Mhm.
everyone knows Candor and Ebb in our community, but how do you sort of make a piece that everybody just associates with the Cheetah and Liza of it all and make it fresh? And so it was cool to experiment with that in our space.
Absolutely.
That's an era that I find really interesting and allows me to dig into the lesser known titles from some of our greats. That's
Mhm.
really fun. But then again, there's I remember going on a binge of just research way back where I was like, good God, everything was either written, directed, or both by George Abbott. And just looking at the body of work of a great artist like that from the past. And there's so many paths we could go down because there are a lot of really great musicals out there that we need to pay attention to.
I agree, I agree. I mean, the thing with The Rink is, like, I don't think most Cantor and Ebb fans realize that Colored Lights is from The Rink. They know the song, but then
Exactly.
you're like, yeah, it's so many great songs that we love, then you go back and like, "Oh, it's from that musical. Maybe I should look into that musical." Um,
Exactly.
yeah, no, listen, I am all for that mission statement. Jill, I that you are doing the Lord's work with that. So keep forth on that, please, from the bottom of my heart.
I mean, honestly, I have the best time. I have this list of just the musicals that I have always heard about but never had an excuse to read, and it's
Mhm.
the most fun. I mean, and this is the fun part of the artistic director job, right? Like, kind of going, "Oh gosh, I've always heard about this piece, but now I'm gonna go to the library at Lincoln Center and I'm gonna go watch the archival and see if it makes sense for us," because everybody knows 2 songs from it and they can't tell me anything else. Except Richie Rich, who can tell me anything about any musical from the '70s, which is really fun.
Yeah, that's what he's there for.
Yeah.
Have you this is where I'm gonna get a little tangenty and nerdy. What was there a specific show or there been a few shows when you went to the library where you're like, "I can't believe I'm getting to watch this show right now." I've always wanted to know what it was like.
Yeah, this was years ago. I'll give you some inside scoop from Roundabout because it's probably no longer relevant. But back in the day, I went and watched Grand Hotel
Mm,
because I was really interested in it for Roundabout, and I just didn't know the piece. And I honestly can't remember if we couldn't get the rights or whatever reason nothing happened there. But it was before the Encores version, and I had heard about that Michael Jeter performance for years and years as this sort of legendary thing, and I remembered seeing him perform on the Tonys. And just getting to watch that in the context of the show felt like such a privilege. And I just remember, like, looking at all the screens around me, and I'm like, "Guys, do you know what I'm getting to see?" I think getting to it's part of what I love about being in this kind of role. I have such an appreciation for theater history and the
mhm,
privilege of getting to program these stages and contribute to that history. Like, how lucky to get to do that. And to know that works that I helped premiere are going to be taught and
mhm.
revived, and it'll make me feel ancient, but it's so great. Um, that's exciting stuff to me.
Yeah, but look at the hat you made, you know?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. It's a good
that's
hat.
awesome. Yeah, you made a hat. I think that's a perfect place to end this off. Where are you at with Marcel on the train?
Yeah, we're at a really interesting juncture because you can't get a ticket. I mean, check within 48 hours of each performance because sometimes seats get released, but we're basically sold out for the entire run. On the day that you and I are talking, we're about to announce we're adding one more matinee because it was the most we could add to the schedule to get a few more folks in.
Mhm.
So we're just trying to meet demand, which is a really wonderful place to be. But I think that we're also taking in the feedback that we got over the last week, post opening and learning from it because I mean, when you work with enhancement partners in particular, there's always talk of future life. And so we have this great opportunity to learn and observe and see what we can use in next steps. And largely that will be out of the hands of CSC. We're partners in this and we want only the best for this show. But it is always such a funny thing to open the show and say, wow, we have nothing more to sell. So we just need to make this a great experience for the artists while they're in our space. That's really important to me that they leave wanting to work here again. And keep paying attention to that while going, all right, we got to start the Emporium next. And and that starts rehearsal at the end of the month. So it's uh it's what I love about nonprofit theater. You're always in transition. You are never just sitting around waiting for the next project because it's seasons. Seasons are constantly either happening or being planned, and that always having to sort of keep your foot on the gas is a huge part of the appeal for me.
Absolutely. And now I will say there's no better way to end it than right here. Jill Rafson, thank you so much for joining us on Broadway Breakdown. I normally ask people, is there a way to where you want people to find you if you want them to find you? But I don't know if you're on social media. I don't know if it's okay to give out your email. Let's just say look into Classic Stage Company. People can support you there. And I mean, are you speaking publicly anywhere at any places, events, anything like that?
Gosh, I feel like I'm just talking at my own theater constantly. You honestly, you can find me in the lobby most days, and I love meeting folks and hearing their thoughts on what we're up to. And yeah, I just look forward to getting to know your listeners and hoping they'll say hello.
Oh, I'm sure they will. They're very vocal. Well, that'll be it for now. Jill, we close out every episode, even these bonus episodes, with a nice little Broadway diva. But who would you like to close out your episode?
Oh my gosh, that is a great question. Into the Woods was a gateway show for me as a kid, so maybe Little Bernadette Peters.
Bernadette Peters?
Mhm.
Okay. Specifically for Into the Woods or any Bernadette Peters?
I mean, listen, I'm partial to Children Will Listen, but I think that you could go with something more upbeat if you like.
I mean, yeah, I could see that. Yeah, not Tell Me on a Sunday. That's not upbeat. No, no. Okay, so yeah, Bernadette Peters. Then take it away, Bernie. Bye. All right, that's going to do it for this episode of Backstage Pass. I want to thank Jill Rafson for her knowledge. I want to thank you all for your ears. And I want to thank Fred for getting me this Backstage Pass today. Thanks, Fred. You're a real one. Tune in next episode because I got a Backstage Pass from another dear friend, Beatrice. Fun gal, always a good time. Beatrice got us a pass to talk to the main creatives behind Marcel on the Train. That is right, the two writers who also are doing double duty, the director Marshall Paylett and the star Ethan Slater. So stay tuned for all of that deliciousness next. Thank you guys.
Enough of being bullied and bossed. Ta-ta, auf Wiedersehen, and get lost. I walked behind him like a meek little lamb and had my fill of his not given.